Hi there, welcome back to another small ramble with me, writer and mental health advocate Tobe Allen. I'm also one half of the BARROW Podcast, the show that I do with my mum looking at divorce, dysfunctional families, and mental illness while we write a memoir together. It might have been in the very first episode of the podcast that I mentioned one, if not all, of the various mental health diagnoses I've received over the years. And I was just thinking that receiving a diagnosis and processing a diagnosis, maybe that's something I should talk about a little bit more because, and I think we will intend to talk more about those specific things next year, or later in the year, depending on whether this comes out the end of 25 or the beginning of 26, when I get into my own story. But just on that, I think what came up for me that I experienced when I did receive diagnoses, was this question of, am I a monster or something? Like that question of what's wrong with me? And oh my God, there really is something wrong with me. I think that those sorts of thoughts, I'm certain that they're common, but, they're probably not helpful, but you do have to kind of go through those thoughts as well. So, what did I receive? I was diagnosed with like a complex PTSD. I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I was also diagnosed with ADHD. And obviously, they all come with various treatments and medications and this sort of thing. But the initial moment of receiving a diagnosis can be quite shocking. It can also be quite brutal. Depends on who you are, and it depends on how you've conceptualized mental health and your relationship with it over the years as well. So certainly in my case, I thought that, it basically felt like I was being told that I was officially a crazy person. And yeah, I didn't cope particularly well with that. It hurt a lot. It was very, very painful. And it took a long time for me to sort of get over or through that initial pain and shock of receiving a diagnosis. And then, of course, had to move on to processing it and sort of dealing with it. I suppose, if I had any advice to give, it would probably be along the lines of like, some of the things I did, were good. Like I went to the literature, which is to say I just bought a bunch of books. I bought a bunch of books on the various diagnoses that I'd received. Some of those were memoirs, which I suppose was maybe the initial sort of inkling, the initial seed sort of planted that, I would write something of my own eventually about it all. But yeah, books help. Just trying to connect with stories that are similar to your own, which again is in part why I've ended up doing this project with Mum. So yeah, I'd recommend turning to books, trying to seek out stories that are similar to your own. Definitely helps you feel less alone, right? but it's also good to get some sort of framework going. And you can work maybe with a therapist on this about how to combat those unhelpful thoughts and narratives that may begin to form around receiving and processing a diagnosis. So, yeah, as I've mentioned before, we talk a lot about narratives on our show. And self-narratives are really important. So, am I a monster, or oh my god, I'm a crazy person? They're not the best narratives to start, building internally. But how do you go about combating those? As I say, therapy really helps. You can work on a strategy with somebody, with a professional, and that's partly what I did. But it was a combination of that, and as I say, seeking out stories similar to my own and reading those, and accumulating as much knowledge as I possibly could, and sort of arming myself with information to be like, oh, okay, I think I can make sense of this, and it's not so shocking. I can put it in context a little bit more. Receiving and processing a diagnosis. If you've got your own story or you want to add to anything I've just said, then feel free to comment. And of course, as always, if you find anything that I've just said interesting, then you'll definitely enjoy the Barrow podcast. You can find links and further information in the description to today's video, as well as on the homepage to the YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Bye.